On the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, John McMullen of 97.3 ESPN.com, his national column at GetMoreSports.com on the NFL. He joins us now with a look at this. So, John, Kendricks released just a little while ago, and obviously a little bit of a cap savings, but what's your read on why Kendricks was let go today?
Well, I think it's that time of year, and obviously the writing was on the wall. We've been talking about this for 2 years. Mychal's contract is just not tenable, especially for a team up against it from a salary cap standpoint as a third linebacker, because the third linebacker on this team essentially only plays 25% of the time. So you can't pay that third linebacker $7.6 million, which was Mychal's cap hit this year. So they've been trying to trade him for 2 years. Hasn't worked out. Last year, obviously, was taken off the table because Jordan Hicks got hurt, and Mychal played very well as a three-down linebacker, and it was okay because he was forced into action. But this year, you remember the Eagles already signed Corey Nelson to play that weak side role in the base defense. He's also a better special teams player. He's also far more cost effective. So we all knew this was coming. The Eagles were hoping to trade him. It didn't work out, and he was seen leaving the building today before practice, and now we know why, because he was released.
Was this done before Worrilow got released? I mean, are they looking and saying, man, and I don't know the extent of Worrillow's injury, but was the timing a little curious?
Yeah, well, the timing wasn't curious. It was pretty clear, as I said. We saw him, Doug Peterson and Carson Wentz spoke before practice started, and we saw Mychal leaving the facility with his backpack. So it's pretty clear that's when it happened. So he was cut earlier in the day, didn't come out till now, probably because they didn't want us knowing it while we were in the locker room to ask the other players what they thought of it. That's why the timing. But he was released before Paul Worrilow went down with his injury. So that's just bad luck.
Is it fair to say that they might not have done that had Worrilow gone down?
Yeah, no, I don't. I think they still would have done it. Obviously, you don't want Paul Worrilow injured, and hopefully it's not as serious as it looked. But they put an air cast on him, so you can only speculate that. And the pain he was in, it certainly looked pretty serious at the time. But also, he was brought in to be the backup to Jordan Hicks in the middle. As I said, Corey Nelson was the guy brought in to sort of take over Mychal's role as that third linebacker in the base defense special team. So I still think it was coming. They just couldn't afford to pay him what he was scheduled to get as a third linebacker. So whether Worrilow got injured or not, I still think it was coming.
And I imagine that he'll get a deal someplace else that they're not going to be able to bring him back at a cheaper rate.
No, and Mychal's not going to be unemployed long, and he's going to get a pretty good contract even at this time of year. He's a very good football player. But the reality is he's not as good as Jordan Hicks. He's not as good as Nigel Bradham. And unfortunately, you got to make these tough decisions. You can't have a player of that caliber as a backup because you can't afford him. It's just the reality of the NFL, not just in this city, but in a lot of cities. He's going to be a starting linebacker in this league. He's a very good player, and the Eagles know that, by the way. This is not about releasing a guy on the downside or anything of that nature. It's just you got to make tough decisions, and he's a luxury as the third guy.
So, John, if this is a tough decision, then of the unrestricted free agents that are out there, and I'm sure you've looked through the list and seen who some of the names are, although Connor Barwin does pop up with me. I guess there's rumors he might sign elsewhere, though. But is there anybody that's, quote-unquote, on the scrap heap, if you will, that they could bring in at a cheap price, or do you think they're going to look in a different direction?
No, I think they're happy with what they have here, and that's Corey Nelson. who was back and was actually practicing today, so he's progressing well from the biceps injury. He was signed in free agency from Denver. This plan was already put into place. They already had the guy in position that they want there. So now when you talk about Worrilow, if he's out for a significant period of time, that hurts the depth behind Jordan Hicks. And then you have some of the same names that were disappointments last year. So that hurts from his perspective. But they already had the plan in position to replace Mychal Kendricks, and they're not going to go outside the organization. If they were thinking about that, they would have just kept Mychal Kendricks, but they wanted to get cheaper. And they think Corey offers a little bit more value in the fact that he's a very good special teams player. Mychal did not play special teams. Now, where it's a significant downgrade is if he's forced to play a lot. If the same thing happens last year and Jordan Hicks is down, then you'd much rather have Mychal Kendricks than Corey Nelson. But if everybody's healthy and the will linebackers are only playing 20, 25% of the snaps, you'd much rather have Corey Nelson because he's the better special teams player.
So does this move today signify or sort of reveal a change in how the Eagles value the linebacker position or how they're going to use it moving forward?
No, I mean, this is league-wide, and the reality of the spread offenses that everybody plays, and the nickel position is really the starting position. That's the guy who plays more than the third linebacker, and it's been that way for a while now in the NFL. For whatever reason, people still use conventional depth charts a lot, and they'll say that third linebacker is a starter, but all you have to do is look at the numbers and the fact that the nickel corner's out there 60 to 70% of the time, and as I said, that third linebacker is playing 25% of the time. It's pretty evident who's more important, and that's, as I said, that's just not Philadelphia. That's the entire league.
So Mychal Kendricks released today. A couple other Eagles veterans players not there, and Michael Bennett and Darren Sproles. And Mike talked about 88 out of 90. That's a pretty good number of people showing up for OTAs when they are, after all, voluntary. Any concern that the two veterans aren't there, or is it you more look at it like, hey, 88 out of 90 is pretty impressive?
No, I mean, it is voluntary, and that's what Doug says. But everybody knew Michael Bennett was not going to be here. It's no secret. He generally didn't go to OTAs with Seattle. And if he did, he would only pop in for a day or two. Same thing with Darren Sproles, who typically spends some time out in San Diego. And Michael lives in Hawaii, so that gives you a pretty good indication of why he doesn't want to do voluntary work in the off season. But you know, Doug kind of admitted he was above board. These things, and I've said it time and time again on the show, these things just aren't that important for veteran players. A little bit more important for Michael because he's obviously in a new system with a new team, but he's been around for a long time. I don't think it will impact him at all as far as being a part of this defense. And you would always like guys to show up, but the reality is some don't. And Michael and Darren have both been in that category for a long time.
Hey, John, obviously a lot of people are talking about the video of Carson Wentz that essentially looks like a guy who did not injure himself. I mean, were you surprised to see how spry he was? I don't want to say running around, but was he running around that you saw today?
Yeah, I mean, I got that one video on Twitter. People want to look at it. I also posted it online at 973ESPN.com where he's working on the footwork, and I was stunned how much he did. He worked throughout the entire individual portion of practice, which is about a half hour before giving way. Obviously, team drills start, and he's not going to be cleared for that for a long time, but I've said from day one he's going to be there September 6th, and I only bolstered that thought today. I mean, the guy, as you said, looks like he's ready to go. He's not, but he looks a heck of a lot better than I expected him to look.
John, I use that parallel to that video game on the boardwalk, the Dance Dance Revolution, where the people get up there and move their feet real quick. I mean, he didn't look like he missed a beat.
Yeah, I was really amazed at how much he did, and especially because before practice, Doug made it sure to point out that this is all just part of his rehab. He's not cleared for anything really football related, and he meant team drills, and that's the case. But as far as football related, he was doing a lot of football related things, and I think that surprised everybody. Just how far along he is. I've always known, what a hard worker he is. So I never thought that was going to be an issue as far as him not doing everything possible to get ready for week one. But, yeah, he looked very, very good.
You think they'll have to pull the reins on him a little bit at times to try, because he is so eager to, get back? And I talked to Mike, too, about just the added motivation of him not being able to be a part of the playoff run and the Super Bowl, being head cheerleader instead of being the guy under center.
Yeah, I actually asked him that question. He admitted at some times he does have to listen to the doctors and the trainers about pulling back because the human nature part of it is you want to keep pushing and pushing. And do everything possible. And sometimes you do need to rest a little bit and take a step back. So he's listening to the trainers and the doctors and doing what he's told. But it's pretty clear that they've given him a wide berth, and he's far ahead of what an average person would be at this stage coming off an ACL and an LCL injury. And you can see it in the video evidence.
I got to say, I'm floored, man. I mean, I had major questions that he would be ready to start the regular season. After watching that video, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to play in the preseason, but I feel a heck of a lot better that he will be cleared and prepared to be a part of training camp. Do you feel the same?
I don't know. I still think, from a doctor's perspective, it's going to be 9 months before it's fully healed from that perspective. So I don't think he's going to be cleared for team drills at the beginning of training camp. I think as you get towards the end of August, whether it's after they break camp into the third and fourth preseason games, I think ultimately that's when he'll be cleared. And that's when he'll be ready to go. But I don't think there'll be much of a ramp-up period. I don't think they're going to say he's cleared and then he needs 4 weeks to get ready to play. I think it's going to be he's cleared and he's going to be the starting quarterback the next day.
And obviously, Jason Peters, another guy, a little surprising that he was participating today.
Yeah, a lot. Jordan Hicks as well. Jordan did a lot of individual work. Similar to Carson, didn't do any teamwork. Jason's in that category as well. Jordan looked very good, was moving very well. A lot of guys are ahead of where we thought they were going to be. Derek Barnett practiced fully coming off the sports hernia surgery, so that was a surprise. So other than the Paul Worrilow injury, which is obviously really, really depressing on day one, most of the guys who were injured seem to be ahead of where they were supposed to be.
That Worrilow injury, John, that happened while in the time that you guys were all in there, I assume, and it had to stop everything. The cart came out and all that.
Yeah, he was carted off. It was 7-on-7 red zone drill, and Nate Sudfeld was throwing over the middle to Donnell Pumphrey, and all three players, Pumphrey, Worrilow, Corey Nelson, collided, and he went down in a heap, grabbed his leg, sort of punched the turf, and then they put an air cast on him, and he had to be carted off. Now, after practice, I talked to Corey Nelson, talked to Nate Gary, and they both said he kind of brushed it off. But I don't know what that means, and the fact that maybe he's just a really tough guy, and he's trying to make his friends feel better, because generally when they put an air cast on, it's not good.
Right. And they were inside because of the weather. I mean, that's one of those things. I know that Doug talked before the practice, but the fact that he says, oh, it's going to be snug, we'll make it work, and then hindsight goes, maybe we should have gone outside.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that had anything to do with the injury. That was sort of just a freak thing that happens when you're in football, and three guys are trying to make a play, and his sort of leg whipped and hit Corey Nelson's back, and he got injured. I mean, I don't think that had anything to do with being inside versus outside or anything of that nature. It was just one of those things that happens when you play football.
John McMullen at JF McMullen. More on the Eagles right now. And, John, Sidney Jones, what you see there? How are they using him today?
Yeah, big surprise there as well. Sidney was with the first-team defense as the nickelback, and I think we all expected him to start sort of on the outside in the nickel and Jalen Mills to go inside. But it was the opposite. Jalen stayed at left corner, Ronald Darby was at right corner, and Sidney Jones was the nickel corner. And it's the first day, so I'm not going to jump to conclusions, because Jim tends to rotate guys into different positions, especially in the off season, and as he gets them up to speed. And remember, last year Patrick Robinson didn't even move to the nickel till August, so it's not to say he's going to be the nickelback, but that was day one. That was where he was. He was the starting nickel corner on the first-team defense.
Yeah, I know, the Sidney Jones, they're looking at him as like, hey, we almost got a draft pick, a high draft pick, because he didn't play at all last year, and seeing how they're going to incorporate him in the defense will certainly be something. How about a guy like Mac Hollins? You wrote about guys that you're watching. He's a guy at wide receiver whose role might change a lot this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a big off season for Mac. Generally, you improve the most between your first and second season, so you have that aspect. He's more comfortable. He's not trying to sort of get his footing on the ground as a guy who's in the city for the first time and meeting people and all the things you go through as a normal person when you have a new job. That's past him. And the fact that Alshon Jeffrey's not here and is not able to practice and is coming off shoulder surgery. So you have those extra reps he's going to get throughout the entire spring, and he's got a chance to show something, because this team knew it needed an upgrade over Torrey Smith, but they went outside the organization to get it, and Mike Wallace. And that tells you they didn't think Mac Hollins was ready. And now he's got an opportunity to sort of change their thinking, and we'll see what he does with it.
By the way, we got some breaking news as we're here. Les Bowen reporting along with Ann Rappaport that Paul Worrilow has suffered a torn ACL. He is out for the season. So right off the bat, a guy that you were kind of counting on to add some depth, you release Kendricks, you're back to square one here, John.
Yeah, tough break, and as I said, it certainly looked bad, and that's what we were all thinking when it immediately happens. So it's no surprise from that perspective, and it's difficult. Certainly he was going to make this football team. They brought him in for a reason. He was going to be a big part as far as an upgrade as a backup to Jordan Hicks, and he was going to be a big part of special teams as well. A good special teams player. But that's what the NFL is. It's kind of a war of attrition. And day one, the Eagles already got some attrition.
John, any news on Brandon Graham? Because that's a guy that obviously made a significant play in the Super Bowl. And any news on his status?
Yeah, he's still in a cast, and he had ankle surgery from what really was an injury suffered on Christmas Day, way back against Oakland. If you remember, he missed the Week 17 regular season finale, which was meaningless. had the extra week off, then came back to the playoffs, but he was not 100%. He was hoping the injury would heal itself on its own. It did not. So they did this procedure to sort of speed up the process. So he's going to be out for the entire spring, but the Eagles and Brandon himself are pretty confident that he's going to be back and ready to go for training camp. So another veteran guy that's not going to do anything in the spring, but I think we've all seen enough from Brandon over the past 3 years to know that he probably doesn't need this work. He's still going to be a really good, really effective player.
Did you get a sense up there today, John, that they're still in that transition between Super Bowl to moving on? Because I saw you tweeted out that picture of Chris Maragos with the Super Bowl jersey, and I know they've made some changes inside the NovaCare complex to put stuff up on the walls, but then at the same time, they try to, like, flip the page. Do you get the sense that they're stuck in that limbo period?
Well, that's the big question. I mean, that's why you have Super Bowl hangovers, and Chris Long talked about it. Chris Long knows better than anybody in that locker room because he's won back-to-back Super Bowls in different cities. But he kind of said, you know, when you win the Super Bowl, you always have people telling you how great you are, and you see all the reminders, as you mentioned, Pete, all around, reminding you of what you did. But it's all in the past, and either you leave it in the past or you're not going to be very successful in the future. That's what Chris kind of said, and I think that's going to be the big sort of narrative of this whole season for the Philadelphia Eagles. Can they focus? And do they want to do it again?
Well,
are they satisfied?
And the interesting thing is, though, we talked about this earlier, John, is, you know, while thinking about back-to-back seems to be unrealistic many times, there's a lot of guys that are key players that were not on the field for that Super Bowl.
Yeah, and that's what Doug kind of said, that motivation for those specific players, and there's some of the best players on this team, starting with Carson Wentz, obviously, but also Jordan Hicks, who we mentioned, Jason Peters, who we mentioned, Chris Maragos, Darren Sproles. This is not only some of the best players on the team, the leaders of the team, and they're all hungry. Now, they're Super Bowl champions. They all won. They're all part of this team, and they're a big part of the team, but they kind of have a chip on their shoulder because they weren't on the field to win it. And Doug is kind of riding that wave. He's hoping those guys kind of focus the rest of the guys and get this team going in the right direction. Like I said, I think that's going to be the big story of the entire season, whether they can focus and they do want to do it again.
All right, Johnny Mac, the football is in full swing, at least for this week. Eagles OTAs, Doug Peterson and Carson Wentz both speaking today. For more on all of the notes from practice today, the video at JF McMullen, check out 973ESPN.com and get all of his Eagles OTA coverage all right there. He appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Thank you, John.
Thank you, guys.